big question is, are we dead? And I think this is a really weird question. Are we dead? I think it's a really weird question because we are actually so far removed from this concept of death. Some of you might have had a near-death experience or have had close experiences with death. Well, the closest I've ever come to one of my friends dying, last summer I lent one of my friends my car, my pretty old car, and she was driving down to the Mornington Peninsula, and on her way back, the brakes actually stopped working, and the car flipped over. She didn't want to crash, so she flipped the car over, and she's fine, and we laugh about it now. This is the car. You can laugh. But, yeah, when I think about it, that day I could have lost one of my really close friends. And it's a really scary thought for me, but I kind of put that thought away because I think we don't like to think about death. Maybe some of you have actually been close to someone who has died. Someone that you did life with every day, and someone that you just saw day in, day out. But I would suspect that for a lot of us here, we haven't actually experienced this yet. And I don't think that we deal with death that well. And I think that we actually trivialize death a lot. And so all around you today, you might have seen zombies, and that's just one way that humans have trivialized death. We talk about dead people coming back to life and infecting each other. Even from when we were kids, we'd play dead. You'd play with fake guns and you'd kill each other and you'd pretend that you were dead. I'm not sure how many of you are into ridiculously extravagant racing movies starring Vin Diesel, but if you've watched Fast Furious 7, you'll have seen the tribute to Paul Walker, one of the actors who died in the middle of the screening of the middle of the filming of the movie. Well, it was actually a really touching scene, and I'll admit, I did shed a tear as Wiz Khalifa rapped "See You Again" in the final scene. But a moment later, I looked down at my phone to check my Facebook notifications, and I was quickly distracted from the real realities of death. I had moved on. Now, this can actually be really hard to do if you've lost someone close to you, like a mother or a father, or a sister or a brother, or even a close friend. You'll know that it's actually really hard to pretend that everything's okay. It's really hard to distract yourself, and it's really hard to think that it's normal, because it's so obviously not. Death is not normal. It's not a normal part of life. Well, today we're going to be looking at what Christians think about death. And this is kind of going to be the flow of how we're going to look at it, and this might sound confusing, but this is what we're going to be exploring for the rest of the talk. We think that the reason why we physically die is that because we're spiritually dead. And the reason why we're spiritually dead is because we're cut off from a relationship with God. And we're cut off from this relationship with God because of something called sin. I know I explained that in the reverse order. It's fine. Now, what is sin? If sin is the thing that's causing all of this bad stuff, then let's talk about sin. Well, if you grew up like me, you would have learned all of your really valuable life lessons from The Simpsons. So, why don't we watch a clip?
Oh, good. Reverend Lovejoy will make Marge take me back. He has to push the sanctity of marriage, or his God will punish him.
Get a divorce.
But isn't that a sin?
Mark, just about everything is a sin. You ever sat down and read this thing? Technically, we're not allowed to go to the bathroom.
Just about everything is a sin. Have you ever sat down and read this thing? Technically, we're not even supposed to go to the bathroom. And I gotta tell you, even as a Christian, it really does feel like that sometimes. That the church is just using the Bible to correct my behavior. That anything I do nowadays is considered a sin. It really seems that the rules given in the Bible are not applicable to me, and they're out of date. But I think that sin isn't actually about breaking a set of rules. I think that what sin is, it's actually a trust issue. And how about we take Reverend Lovejoy up on his challenge to actually sit down and read this thing. So in your outlines, I've given you a Bible passage, and it's a story that Jesus tells to some people when he was on earth 2,000 years ago. So I'm just going to read that out for us. There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. And when he finally came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and I'll go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Just treat me as one of your hired servants.' And so he arose, and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." Alright, so we're just going to spend some time unpacking this story. What's actually going on here? Well, there's a father who has 2 sons, and the younger one demands his father to give him his inheritance right now, so that he can go to the city and squander his property, so that he can go do what he wants. And so the father divides all of his possessions in 2 and gives the younger son his share of the inheritance. But what happens in the story? Well, our reckless little friend ends up just getting wrecked. He spends all of his father's money, and now there's a great famine in the land. He's broke and alone, with nothing to do, nowhere to go but to feed the pigs, longing just to eat the pigs' food. What's going on here? Well, I don't think this is like how you guys have left home to come to Melbourne to go to uni. He hasn't simply just taken this next important step in his into adulthood by moving out of home. No, the son has asked his father for the inheritance that he would receive if his father had died. It's actually as if he said to his dad, "You are dead to me. All I want from you is your money. I want nothing else. I don't want to live under your rules. I don't want to acknowledge you or even be in your presence." It's that moment when you slam the door on the relationship. You're done and you're out. And I think that this is actually a more accurate picture of what sin looks like. The sin was that the son simply wanted nothing to do with the father. He didn't trust the father. He didn't want to live under his dad's rules any longer. He didn't trust that what his father had given him or wanted for him was enough for him. And he didn't trust that the father knew what was best for him. Well, this whole trust issue, it's kind of like how when you guys were in year 12, a lot of people might have said, "Don't go to Melbourne Uni, you won't get a job after your undergrad degree." You didn't trust them, you came to Melbourne Uni, and you've realised that after your 3-year degree, you'll have a $20,000 HECS debt and no job. Unless you're a commerce student, but... Well, this whole sin thing, it's the same. It's not trusting that God knows what's good for your life. It's walking away from a relationship with Him. And this trust issue has actually been happening since the start of humanity. So, do you remember that time that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and God said to them, hey guys, you guys can eat of any fruit and any tree in the whole garden, eat it and it'll be good for you. You'll actually enjoy it. But just don't eat of this one tree. I assure you, if you eat of this one tree, you will die. Well, what's going on there? What did Adam and Eve do? They ate of the tree. They ate from the tree that they shouldn't have. Adam and Eve weren't satisfied with what God had given them. They didn't trust that God knew what was best for their lives. And they instead believed the lies of a sneaky serpent who tempted them to trust themselves. Be your own kings. Live your own lives. Who is God to tell you what you should do or how you should act? Or even what you should eat? Isn't this the message that we hear all the time? Do what you want. Don't let anyone tell you how to live your life. You are your own kings. You are the rulers. Just believe in yourself. Well, just as the Father didn't stop his Son from leaving him, so too God did not stop Adam and Eve from leaving him and taking the fruit for themselves. He didn't stop them from shutting the door on the relationship with him. Well, in all of these accounts, the consequences for their actions have been pretty clear. In the story that Jesus tells, the consequences for the younger son was not only that he was living in a pigsty, longing to eat the pig's food. The greater consequence for the younger son was that he was separated from his father, and that being apart from his father, he was slowly beginning to perish. Similarly, the consequences for Adam and Eve was death. Even though they didn't die physically straight away, they died spiritually. They didn't trust God, and they walked out of the relationship with God. But Jonah, you ask, how does this have any relevance to my life? That's a great question. Well, if there is actually a God who created us, a God who molded us and shaped us, and who knows what's good for us, knows what's a good way for us to live, and a God who wants to be in a relationship with us, then in not acknowledging him and not trusting him, we've slammed the door in the face of God and disregarded his whole existence and being. We've walked away from the relationship with God. We've said we don't trust him. We don't even believe he exists. You are not moral. We don't need a God to tell us how to live or what's good for us. And like the son, we have run away to a far-off country to be far away from God. We are so far away from God, slowly heading towards death, slowly perishing in the pigsty. And it has been so long since humanity has been in a relationship with God that we can't even imagine what it's like to be with him anymore, to be in a relationship with him. The pigsty is all that we know. Although, for a lot of us, we wouldn't even think that we're in the pigsty. We're still in the city. We're living out the good times. We've gone to uni. We're enjoying our youth. We're going on pub crawls and booze cruises. We're squandering our wealth because YOLOs. But the reality is that we're all destined for death. Whether it's what we consider a premature death that comes too sudden, or a death after 80 years of a life well lived, death is coming for us, and we've been left for dead. Because death is the just and fair consequence of living in a way that doesn't acknowledge or trust God. Alright, so, you know how you always hear Christians saying, Jesus died for you? He loved you so much that he died on the cross? What does that even mean? Well, this is the whole reason why that's so significant. If death is the just and fair consequence that we deserved for walking out in the relationship with God, Jesus actually died that death for us. This is why we need Jesus, and this is why he dies the death. How does this relate to our reckless little friend who ran away from his father? Well, He did return to his father, and how did he return to his father? Did he return to his father saying, "Here, I have all the money that I took from you, I want to pay it back to you, and please accept me just as your servant, and please accept me as part of your family again"? No, actually, he didn't have anything to give to his father or offer to his father. All he could do was beg for forgiveness. And how did the father respond to his son? Well, the father actually absorbs the debt he absorbs the money that the son took from him, and he freely forgives him at his own cost. And while the son is still a long way off, the father sees him and runs to him and embraces him. And it's quite the same with God. How are you going to pay back God when the consequences for not trusting him is death? You can't. He forgives us for not trusting him or acknowledging him, and he can only forgive us because someone else paid that death. Someone else died the death that we should have died. He can forgive us because of Jesus. And Jesus' death is the only way that we can be in a relationship with God and have life. So why don't you see for yourself who Jesus is?